A very good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where and when you're watching us from. My name is Mutazi Washira Wanyaga, Mujiro wa Baria Kariki. Dinagwihoka kumangongo shudhiri ya chumaga huho, muridhayo, dhayo, dhayo. Tonight is a very uh, interesting night for us here in African Corner. It is the 19th day of June, the year is 2024. And I'm so glad to be back here once again to have this conversation with now Moraa. Last week we had an interesting conversation with Elvis Mutugi and Kimani Mwangi. They were talking about, the mental health, especially for men. We are in that month. So if you haven't checked it, you can go and watch it in our YouTube channel. So right now, we are going to have a very interesting, and you guys cannot imagine how pumped and how I've been waiting for this conversation with Moraa. One, because it is a topic that I've been thinking about, I've been of interest, and then two, the person who I'll be having this conversation with. One, because Moraa is she's good vibes. I've interacted with her in various occasions, and she's good vibes. I can tell you for sure. Now, Moraa holds various positions and she does a lot of things, but just let me mention a few because that will be right. Moraa is an artist. First of all, she has an amazing song. One of she knows the song that I love. She'll mention it. It is on her channel. You can go and check it out. It's a very amazing song. And also she is also a mental health advocate, and she deals also with children in terms of children support and safety and care, and she will be mentioning to us about all that. But what is interesting about Moraa is that the way she's an artist and she blends these various, let me say, dimensions in one person is interesting. So I'm very honored tonight to have her on the show and to have this conversation with her as she teaches us and we learn from her about trauma in the African context. Moraa, how are you? Welcome to African Corner once again.
That is a very wonderful CV. Well, thank you very much. Hello, my name is Moraa Mengwa. I am an artist, among the many things you have mentioned, of course. But above all, I really believe deeply in kindness and realness and deepness. Yeah. So I think much as we always describe ourselves with the many titles, and the many roles that we play in our lives, I think it also is very important to define ourselves. I wish I could add to the bio that the value systems that I stand for, that even if these roles were taken away from me, one day I wake up and I have this amnesia and I can't remember how to sing or all this, I can still be kind and be loving to my people. Yes.
Wow,
And to
amazing.
everyone. So my name is Moraa Mengwa again. I am a psychologist. I advocate for mental wellness. And I'm so excited that this year we have taken men's mental health very seriously, and even more excited that we can have conversations on mental health, and in particular in the African context rather, because more often than not we have a very Eurocentric view of mental health, and in today's conversation, trauma. So yeah, this is a conversation I've been looking forward to, because myself, I've been thinking about trauma very deeply, because it really defines how we end up, if depending on how we respond to this trauma. So yes, please.
Yeah,
I am
thank you.
excited. Thank you.
I already told you. I told you Moraa is good vibes, and you guys can already see for yourself. Moraa, comments have already started coming in here. I can see Kimani Mwangi is saying, "Great to be here. Thank you, Kimani, for tuning in live." And also Alex Oburu, another friend, says, "Great work, Washira. Keep going." And there's sending some emoji there. Thank you, guys. Yeah, you can send in your comments. You can send in your thoughts. Anything you'd like to share with us in the comment section. We'll be reading them as we proceed. Moraa, somebody, also another friend told me once I shared this, that you're going to have this conversation tonight, and they told me that you guys you should not forget that we are still fighting in this Kenya. Especially as
Yeah.
millennials and the Gen Z, there is still some sort of
Yes.
battle. Yeah. So guys, we have not forgotten that. We are aware and we are alive to the fact that Kenyans are saying that enough is enough, and we need this finance bill to be relooked, and people are protesting in the city, and people
In
are
fact, not just relooked, completely done away
yeah.
with. And I think it's a conversation we will be having as part of trauma in the African context. Because I think
Mhm.
one or another, we cannot talk about trauma in the African context and not talk about the injustices that are within our communities and in our African countries. And yeah, so it
Mhm.
is very much part of it. Yes, sorry to interrupt, but I thought I should say that.
Yeah. That's amazing for people to know. Yeah, because it is indeed true that the way people are saying things are not going on well, and now the government is bringing in different things. It affects everybody.
Mm.
It cuts across board, and we are glad to see that yesterday they say they are going to reduce some certain things. We just hope at the end of the day that this thing becomes what the citizens of the Republic of Kenya want. And the applaud is this:
Mm.
Gen Zs and millennials are being applauded. Every people thought that these people are only keyboard warriors, but you're seeing Gen Zs in the streets and
Yeah.
they're protesting it is their right. They're practicing their right to protest and picket. It's amazing. Now, thank you very much, everybody who's joining us live. I can see Live, Love, and Love saying tuned from Nkai Murunya. He will tell us how we pronounce that. I know it is in China. So thank you very much, Live, Laugh, and Love, for joining us tonight. I know it is almost past midnight there. Thank you for joining us. Now, Mora, we are talking about trauma. What is trauma basically, for those of us who might not understand exactly what we mean by trauma? What do we mean when we say this is trauma or this is traumatic? What do we experience as trauma? And maybe are there different types of trauma that are there? Maybe you can start off with that.
Okay. In the best way, layman's term I can put trauma is when your brain can't say, hey, this happened long time ago and it shouldn't affect us anymore. We're good. We're good. But now
Mm,
your brain is like, no, that happened right now, and I'm feeling the feelings that I felt then right now, be it
mhm,
2 generations ago, be it 10 years ago, whatever I felt in that distressing moment, in that moment of pain, in that moment where there was extreme anguish, a stressful situation. Those feelings I felt then are the feelings I am feeling right now, and there's no way you're going to convince me that was 10 years ago. So you can call it an anxiety disorder, okay?
mhm,
An emotional response to a highly, extremely stressful situation. You can call it that. So it borders on emotions. It borders on how you feel and how you respond emotionally to a certain situation, especially that is very, very distressing.
mhm.
So in the very simplest of terms, that is what I would call trauma. Yes.
I can see Leaf Love and Love is already asking that Mora give us stages of trauma if they are there, and any signs of or symptoms of trauma.
Okay. Okay. That is a very, very interesting question, but I'll get to that. Let me first talk about the various forms of trauma. There are two ways we can look at it: the severity of it, and
Mhm,
then the causes of it, because these are ways we can look at uh, trauma. We have acute trauma, and acute trauma is when there's just a single stressor. It could be I'll give an example. A few weeks ago, I was going to Coast, and I was late. The bus in Konnichiwa Kidogo, yeah. So I had to get on a bike and get to the station
mhm,
before, yeah. So when I got on the bike, I got an accident. It was very fast. Things happened so fast. What I remember is screaming and finding myself on the ground. Yeah, I had never before gone through an accident, whether it's on a bike or on a vehicle or whatever. So when I fell, I would say it was a very stressful thing for my mind and my body, right? But that was a single stressor. It hadn't happened before. It wasn't, I wouldn't say major because I wasn't exactly hurt. So I just stood up and tuliendelea. And I'll get to that response to trauma. But then if that really affected me in a way that I'd say I will never ever again in my life board a bike, or I will never go to coast again, or I will never go to town again, or get a, it affects the quality of my life. We always say this, that we term it as a mental issue when it is affecting the quality of your life. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there are parts and aspects of your life that are affected by something. We can say that there's a mental implication, there's a mental health implication to it. Yeah. And so part of it is, I would call that the acute trauma. Okay. And then we have chronic trauma, when you go through a traumatic event over and over and over again. Yeah. Whereby you have gone through, someone has gone through, say, an accident. That's just a simple example. And it happened once and it happened twice the second time. So that can be termed as chronic trauma, when there's a level of repetition on that extreme type of, that specific type of stressor. So when you're exposed to that stressor over and over and over again, we call it chronic trauma. And then complex trauma. Complex trauma is when you experience different types of trauma at the same time. For example, you are going through child abuse, if, for example, for a child abuse, and they're going through neglect, because neglect is also a cause of trauma, and they're going through lack, because poverty is also a form of trauma, and we'll just have that conversation. So when you're experiencing different forms of trauma at the same time, we call that complex trauma. So that's on different types of trauma in terms of acute, chronic, and complex trauma. Yeah, but other forms of trauma, from my notes, I just talk about secondary trauma, which is very prevalent in people who are caregivers to people who have gone through trauma, like say psychologists or therapists, yeah, or people who are taking care of that person. Could be a guardian or a friend. So this is trauma that you get vicariously, that you did not go through that trauma, but because you have close contact, you have a connection to the person who went through that trauma, you get to experience that trauma. Other forms are like childhood trauma. We talked about childhood trauma in passing, but I mostly, when I talk about trauma, I refer to childhood trauma, because then a child's brain is developing. It's not complex enough. It's not sophisticated enough to understand what is happening. And so, because that is the point where your brain is developing, it largely affects how your brain, develops. And I think we'll touch also a bit on the parts of the brain that are affected by trauma. Yeah.
Okay.
Then we have collective trauma, and that is trauma that happens in big masses. For example, COVID-19 was what we'd call a collective trauma, and it happened to a large mass of people. And things like wars and natural disasters are also causes of trauma, and they can be categorized under collective trauma. Talk about generational trauma, and now here, when you talk about generational trauma, you can look at it in two ways. You can look at it in the setting of the genes, epigenetics, where there have been numerous studies talking about how DNA can be altered when life-altering stressor, someone goes through a life-altering stressor, and especially if it is chronic trauma or complex trauma. Understand? Yeah. So it's very interesting how you go through something, and since our bodies are always learning, because survival for the fittest, remember that, and how you have to go through something. Say, if fire burns you, you have to keep it in memory that, hey, fire burns, and then you won't go to the fire to get burnt by the fire. So we are all learning, and so does our DNA and all that. So when you go through a very traumatic experience, especially if you're exposed to it over and over and over again, your DNA tends to be altered as well. And we obviously know that our genes come from, our parents. And if it is passed from your great grandparents to your grandparents to your parents, and these genes have been altered in connection to the trauma that they went through, chances are it will affect your levels of resilience, your triggers, your levels of response, how you respond to trauma. It also affects that, and your disposition to going through having a mental health issue. And it's very interesting because in my reading, I found a study that was done on Holocaust victims, in Germany. I know we are talking about African context, but again, as I said, we very much have, in terms of research, our views are very Eurocentric, because who is doing the research? Definitely not here. And I feel like we should really, really push for research to be done right here in Africa, because the reference material that we have right now is very Eurocentered. We talk
Yeah,
about Pan-Africanism. Push,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. So research
yeah.
should also be part of it. And I'm glad we. Uh-huh.
Mhm. I'm seeing
No.
somebody texting me here on WhatsApp, and they're saying they now, because they are from the generation of Mau Mau, they understand now the things, the generation of trauma. Anyway, thank you for that, Mora.
Mhm.
And now, let's now try or attempt to look at it in an African setup. Now in the context of
Mhm.
Africa and in Africa in
Yeah.
itself. When you're talking about trauma, how does it manifest in our African communities? Even here specifically in Kenya, how does it manifest? Because from what the list that we are learning here, I can hear generational trauma, and somebody is saying it as a joke, but it might be as true as it can get. Because the
Mhm.
generation from the Mau Mau people, we are looking at the childhood trauma that you've mentioned. The trauma that especially here in Africa, trauma and matters of mental health when we were young were not really considered. So, how now does trauma now
Yeah.
manifest itself very uniquely in our African context?
Um, it's I like that question, because we cannot talk about trauma in the African context and not talk about the historical and socio-cultural context of it all. Yeah, and talk about the norms and the practices of it, and the manifestations of it in our context. And I have to say that uh, starting from colonialism, yeah, we cannot talk about in the general view, because that is one thing that as Africans we have generally experienced: colonialism, and how that really tear down our social structures. I like to talk about community when it comes to the cultural, African cultural setup and systems and structures, that we were very much in community, right? So that means, from the way we viewed life, our perceptions, again, going back to how we have urbanized ourselves, which is the holiday is not bad, but there are things we ought to pick from. We literally, maybe we didn't just leave them, maybe we were forced to because of the circumstances of colonialism and all that. But if you think about it, we are very much individualistic. As time goes by, we can become more. It is, even therapy is viewed as it is your fault. You are going through this. You need to fix it, and we forget the social aspect, which is strongly tied to the African context of community and togetherness.
Mm,
Talk about Ubuntu, you know, and it also affects the intervention, and how trauma was handled back then is not the way trauma is handled today, and the interventions around trauma, that is not how it's handled today. And so causes of trauma in the African context, talked about colonialism, we talked about armed conflict. There's been a lot of civil unrest, there's been a lot of you know uh, political instability in our African context.
mm,
And what does that do to a generation? Talk about 10 years, 20 years of armed conflict. And the
mm,
saddest part is we even have child soldiers, unfortunately. So when we were talking about childhood trauma, that is part of the trauma that is in our very much in our African context. Countries like Mali and Sierra Leone and South Sudan and Somalia have gone through years of trauma connected to warfare, you know, and that really does something to you. That really does something on how you perceive life and your quality of life and your brain chemicals and the parts of your brain. Because parts like we have three main parts that are affected by trauma. We have the hippocampus,
mhm,
we have the deals mostly with memory and saying, hey, this is the present and that's the future and all that. Then we have the amygdala, and that's how you respond, your emotional response to fear and all that. Prefrontal cortex, which is very much affected by how you think, your decision making, and how you respond. And the prefrontal cortex says, hey, that, how do you respond to part to trauma or a stressor or a trigger? Yeah. So when a child, say, under the pretext of war, when a child goes through war and the whole political instability part, that does something to their brain. We always say that the prefrontal cortex it fully grows when you're above 25 and above, in Hapa. That's why it's the prefrontal cortex. Yeah. So political instability and civil unrest and armed conflict really affect, talk about the 2007 general elections and then the war and the political unrest that came after, and how it affected the people. Till today, there are people who, because these parts of the brain are affected in a way that you remember things very vividly, and then your brain is like, I can't remember that happened 10 years ago. Imagine having to go through that amount of pain because your brain cannot process that happened a long time ago. So you're going through that pain over and over and over again. And that's why things like flashbacks are a symptom of trauma.
Okay.
Yeah, so talk about gender violence, which is very prevalent. I sit in the task force working group on ending harmful cultural practices. We don't often say cultural because the culture holds, people are very much tied to their culture. And whenever we have discussions of the vulnerabilities of girls and women, we can see a lot of trauma around it because things like FGM are very prevalent in some communities in Kenya and at large in Africa. And you get the feelings of hopelessness whenever you talk, to the survivors of these abuses. You get a lot of hopelessness, and pain, and depression, and anxiety, and uncertainty. And they predispose someone to mental issues, and they can be an indicator of trauma. And then we have poverty and social economic stresses. That is a very, when you have gone through years of war and instability, of corruption and all that, and then we go back to the conversation we were having at the beginning on the finance bill, when you cannot afford even the decency of a meal, water, the very, very basics, that does something to your sense of self-worth. That does something to your sense of self-belief, esteem, efficacy. And I always like to talk about the 5 psychological needs that have to be met for you to be, wholesomely, just like, you need food and you need water and you need clothes. You need these 5 psychological needs: safety, trust, esteem, control, and intimacy. And what trauma does to these 5 psychological needs is it strips you away from them. Your sense of safety, your sense of trust, your sense of esteem, your sense of control, and your sense of intimacy is taken away from you. And that's dangerous because you will not be able to fully function correctly, because when we talk about food and water, you need this to survive physiologically, right? Yeah. But then if you do not have them, how are you going to be able to be resilient? You understand? Yeah. So, and that goes even into, issues of black tax. You are expected to take care of your whole community. And that's why community is important, because when you help people to back you up and take care of you as you take care of your people, that helps you. But when you're just an individual living in a very individualistic world, you are alone. there's no support you're getting, but people are expecting that support from you, and that can be very traumatic in a way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think in general that we can talk about when it comes to the various causes or common causes of trauma, and there are different ways this manifests. Because you had talked about, or rather asked, how does trauma manifest? It manifests in different ways. One is in terms of behavioral responses or symptoms. We have four main ones: emotional,
Mm-hmm.
cognitive, uh, physical, and behavioral. Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So emotional, definitely trauma, feelings of, sorry, rather anxiety, depression, sadness, fear. Those feelings that you have, those emotions that you go through when you are experiencing trauma. Yeah,
Okay.
and
Okay.
then we
Okay.
sorry, go on, please.
No, no, you can go on. Can go on. No problem. We finish on the statement.
Then we have, then we have cognitive responses of, or cognitive symptoms of
Mm-hmm.
trauma. Now, cognition is how your brain processes things, how you gain knowledge, how you understand. Cognition is thought process, decision making, critical thinking. Cognition is memory. We've talked about memory. That happens, the parts of the brain that are affected with the memory, and how your brain cannot uh, re- either retrieves very expressive, vivid memories of a traumatic event, or altogether sometimes, human beings are very interesting. That's what I always say, because in one person, the way trauma manifests in one person is not the way trauma manifests in another person. Because in one person, trauma can go like, we will forget absolutely everything. There are people who say, I cannot remember 10 years of my life. They went through a very traumatic experience that the way they had to protect the brain, themselves, the brains were like, we are not going to remember that part of our lives. And so you ask them, hey, what happened the last 5 years? They were on autopilot. They had to survive. And one thing the brain is going to do, the brain is going to do what it has to do to survive. It will not care about anything else, you know and that's why I'll take us away from a bit to just make this point get home. That's why when someone is like is going through a very, like they're in ice, how do we call it, the freezing, the body tries, the mind rather tries to think of it, unapata wametoa nguo, they usually
Mm-hmm.
find them very naked, and they have
Mm-hmm.
frozen to death, because the brain is telling them, hey, we need to produce as much heat to keep us alive, forgetting that the conditions outside are not favorable. I've forgotten the
Mm-hmm.
word, but that just shows that your brain will do anything and everything to
Okay.
survive. So part
Okay.
of it is, some people will forget, absolutely forget. There are parts of the brain that are going to shrink due, just like the amygdala or the prefrontal cortex. They will shrink literally because you went through such a traumatic event that, since they cannot be able to handle it, they will forget. Understand?
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
A
yeah.
physical, rather, we're talking about cognitive symptoms. So your concentration is affected, because part of uh, cognition is concentration and attention. So your concentration is affected, your attention to things is affected, the way you think, you're not, the way you think is very muffled. Yeah. And your memory will be very distorted. You forget very quickly. You cannot remember some things, so memory as well. You get intrusive thoughts, nightmares, and all that. And then we have physical symptoms: fatigue, insomnia, your heart races a lot, and we have what we call somatic symptoms. Now, this is very important because more often than not, a lot of African people go through somatic symptoms of trauma.
Mm,
And somatic symptoms are, these are like, physically or physiologically, you are going through a certain pain, or you're sick, you're physically sick, but when you go for tests, they cannot tell where this is coming from. where they've done the test, they've done everything, but the medics are not exactly, the doctors cannot tell where this particular issue is coming from. It could be migraines. You're having severe migraines or severe body aches. It could be a backache. It could be pain around the hips.
Okay.
When if truly it is looked into, what you can find is that it is due to a traumatic event. And sometimes, remember when we talked about generational trauma,
Yeah.
where now uh, physically these somatic issues are passed from one generation to another.
Okay.
So that is part of the physical symptoms. And lastly, behavioral symptoms. You tend to withdraw from social circles, you become antisocial, you become very irritable and don't want to connect with people. And remember when we talked about intimacy as a form of psychological need, your sense of intimacy is affected, and in general, the way you interact with people uh, is affected. So behavioral symptoms are also a manifestation of trauma. Yeah. So we
Okay.
have other ways like cultural expressions and all that, but mainly this is a way you can identify trauma. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I think everybody is learning with me here. We are hearing a lot of real example. And Mora, I can see some comments are coming in here. Let me just go through them quick fast. Can see Baraka Maui saying that trauma has been part of life, but I wonder those days in the 1990s things were cool compared to the 20s. I think now in the 2020 I need to learn more. And he also say, and then live, laugh, and love. Says tells Baraka Maui, life keep on changing, and thus challenges becomes different and tougher compared to the back days years. And then live, love, and love is responding to Baraka Maui. Say you are trying to say as the day goes, you're becoming weak. Okay, there's an interesting conversation going on here. I think Kevin Wairimo saying great to be here. Thank you, Kevin. And Live, Love, and Love says Baraka Maui, tough times create stronger men. Stronger men can create easy times create weaker men. Okay. And then we have Kevin Werimo says that recently read on the frontal context stuff that I didn't clearly understand it. How true is that our brain doesn't develop further after the age of 25? I think Mora will be responding to how true that is. But before we go there, Mora, let me go back to this conversation of the African context of trauma here. So you have tell us quite well how it manifests rather. And now we maybe if you can be able to understand how our cultural beliefs and practices in Africa are influencing these things. Okay, you have mentioned quite well about them, but kuna mtu maybe alinyongwa na waru and he's from the side of the country that I come from, or somebody who loves potatoes like yourself. Now they are not going to eat anything concerning that. So how does now the cultural beliefs and practices, even religion, uh, now influence this understanding and the trauma in itself? And sorry, and
That
even let me also merge that with this. Talk also about the societal factors that are there. Because they are not as separate from the cultural beliefs. The societal factors such as, we talk of poverty, you have mentioned about it. We talk about politics. We are seeing how right now it is very politically hot in the country, thanks to the Gen Zs and the millennials of this country. And how does this thing now influence trauma altogether, Mara?
let me start from the cultural perspective. Just like everything has pros and cons, there are ways that in the African context, and I think it was very interesting. Was it live, laugh, and love? Live, love,
Mm,
and love, or the person he was responding to, she was responding to, the way he said, was it easier in the 90s than it is today, or what was up? What was going on? Yeah, it was Baraka, Miss
mm,
Maui. So
mm,
Baraka, I'd like to first start by this. when we talked about community as a very essential part of how we respond to trauma. One of the biggest conversations we should be having should be psychosocial support, community, and how that affects trauma and how that connects to trauma, right? Back then, I remember, I always say this, I remember when I was growing up and we had a lot of community around us where there's no way you will sleep hungry when you have a neighbor. You get that we would make a lot of chapos or a lot of mandazis or a lot of githeri, not just for ourselves, but
Yeah.
because we wanted to share with our neighbors. Right now, do we even know what is the first name of our name alone? That sense of community we do not have it. We can talk about the way our social structures were done away with, but still it is our responsibility to connect with people around us, because psychosocial support is very important. The load becomes easier to carry when there are people around us to help us carry it. So back then we had a more sense of community. Yeah. And even in our intervention and response to trauma, we had instances where once a member of the community, even the way trauma was viewed and perceived, it was perceived as a social thing. It was not individualistic. Right now, trauma and any other mental health issues viewed as an individualistic clinic, from a individualistic clinical view. And we say, go for therapy, but we forget that there are social aspects to it, which were very much connected to the African communities and how we handled trauma back then. And that is why it is very important to push for integration of both African and current contemporary modern medical therapy and all that. Now, I was watching a documentary and it was very interesting how they handled a situation. So I'd like to describe it to you. This is an indigenous community in the Congo, and the wife had gone, the husband, or rather ex-husband, had come home and beaten the wife so bad, and held the kid, threw the kid, and just had caused a fracas in that house, and the lady was very hurt. Now, of course, the community, the women in the community took this man out of that house, threw him out, gave him a good beating because that's how they handle it. Gave him a beating and excommunicated him and told him, you know what, we don't want you here. We talked about gender-based violence and other harmful practices against women as a form of trauma. Now, I found how they handled it very interesting. What they did the next morning, because that happened at night, what they did the next morning was they asked this woman to come outside, yeah? And then this woman talked about it, let it out, and cried about it. And then they all had that conversation. But immediately after that, what they did was a reenactment of that situation, but in a comical and supportive way. And at the end, it was very interesting to see, because it was only the older women in the community were allowed to do the reenactment. And of course, with the understanding that this is because what I got is this is a way of healing that I had never seen before as done like that. And of course, I'll talk about other interventions that are linked to the African community that I have done before in community outreach programs. But part of it was I think about trauma as a cognitive issue. It affects the way you think, the way you perceive things, the way you understand things, the way you acquire knowledge of things, the way you interpret things. That's your cognition. And that's why we have cognitive therapy, because it's supposed to shape how you view things. It's supposed to either alter, it's supposed to support your view of something, how you view things. So when you view something as painful and traumatic, that also responds to your experience of trauma. So these old women, from my interpretation of things, they tried to lessen the pain and have a different perception of what that situation, that whatever happened that night meant. And if it change how what something means to you, it'll affect how you respond to it. You understand? Like for me, um, someone slapping me would be like they were upset with me and they slapped me. But someone else would think, hey, they hate me, they have disrespected me, and talk about making a heel out of an anthill type of situation, because different people view different things and give different meanings to things, and that affects to how they respond to it. So back to the women in that indigenous community in Congo. So seeing these women reenacted, so one old woman was the husband, the other old woman was the wife being beaten, and the other old woman was the child crying. So they were all just doing this and reenacting it in a way that was very interesting to me. And at the end, everyone was laughing about it, and just it was in a very light note. It started heavy, but at the end of the reenactment and all that, it was in a very light way. And I think using art-based interventions to start the conversation and taking away that pain from making it individual to yourself, because I have done a bit of work on um, forum theater, on drama therapy, on psychotherapy. And I have found, especially for young people and children, even other communities at large, but art-based interventions have worked very well, because what happens is we are talking about something that affects the whole community, not often talked about. It is whispered mostly, but also it sparks conversation in a way that you do not own the pain, you do not own the circumstance. You have put it on someone else, and they're doing it away from you, and they're acting it out. And from that, you can have a conversation about it. You can either do what you call mirroring, or you can try to change characters and change perception and change response to certain situation, and
Okay.
opens up someone's mind. So yeah, so as we think about how uh, the therapy in the clinical sense, which is also works, I do not discredit therapy. In fact, I'm a big advocate for therapy, but also thinking about how in the African context they used to handle trauma can also help us to understand how to make intervention, mental health interventions, popular in the African context, because things like therapy are very much frowned upon. There's a lot of stigmatization when it comes to trauma, and that is part of the cons that we talked about when it comes to African um, connection to, or rather acceptance and access to mental health. There's also the bit about policy and the cost when it comes to therapy, but also just the mere fact that we have not embraced therapy fully, because even back then when we would talk about depression, it was very much viewed as a ni ugonjwa ya mzungu ama ni
Yeah.
it's far away from us. Mental issues were far away from us, and how they were viewed were not. This is it. And in fact, the way they would think of them is in very superstitious ways, like usually rogwa. They were bewitched, eh? And how they would respond to this is they would go to ganga in the community or a healer, and then they would have these rituals and all of that, or herbs to
Okay.
to support these people who have gone through who are going through mental health issues or trauma, because if something startles you so bad that you scream, or a memory, because trauma can give you nightmares, so you're waking up in the middle of the night and you're screaming, they will either take you to church to be prayed for, because over time we have embraced religion as a, or the church or whatever religious interventions there are, to as a response to mental issues,
Yeah.
or a person with schizophrenia or bipolar, because there's a lot of symptoms like hallucinations and delusions. They say we are lirogo, we need to pray for them, when really they are very much in need of support.
Yeah.
But then
True.
again, you cannot wholesome, discredit the whole idea of religion, because in there we have community. You know, I say the main reason why people are very much connected to the fellowship within church is because of the community it brings. We as human beings are not isolated. We are very much social beings. So just like um honey to bees, we stick very much to, or bees to honey, we stick very much to places, spaces where we feel this is my community, right? Talk about intimacy, because intimacy is your sense of connection, the way you bond to people. So
Okay.
if that
Okay.
is where you find your refuge, how can we then, in our African context, support preachers, support these medicine men who are very much known by the community? How do we build a capacity in a clinical sense for them to understand that if this person is schizophrenic or has PTSD, it's not enough to just pray for them, because there's a lot of authority. The other last week, was it this week? I think this last week, I was attending a conference where they were connecting science and faith in the fight against cervical cancer, and I thought it was very interesting that they brought in the aspect of the religious leaders and religious institutions, because you do not have any idea how much authority that these religious leaders have within their communities. So, what if we did actually empower the sheikhs, empower the pastors, the priests, and had them go through some sense of training so that even as they speak to the masses within our African context, even as they have conversations on the pulpit, these are things they can use the Bible to connect to, and talk about therapy and community and psychosocial support. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I
Okay.
think
Yeah.
I've covered a bit on, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you have pretty much covered almost the next question, almost five questions that are coming next, because you have mentioned about the
Okay.
misconceptions that we have, and you have mentioned about how we can be able to combat this. You have talked about, okay, therapy as one of them being there, and you have also talked about. I wanted to hear your thoughts on how we can now put the traditional and modern practices integrated, and I've seen you have
Mhm.
mentioned also the religion aspect of it being integrated to support trauma, recovery, because part of this trauma that is there or is present has been caused by these people, the same people who can be used
Mm.
as vessels for recovery. And the funny
Mhm.
thing is that most of them do not know that they do not know. Anyway, I can see many comments still coming in. Appreciate everybody who's joining us live here. We can see Live, Love, and Love saying that, yeah, social living is no longer the life. Nowadays, a man is to die for himself, but God for us all. And then Fredman Congo says that, guys, do you know almost everyone needs psychological healing? Unfortunately, healing is not easy. Many people avoid it. Healing is a matter of personal commitment and going through the healing process. He also says that it is high time as Africans to prioritize psychological healing. We can't afford to pass on to the next generation some of the pains we carry. It is unfortunate that we never know when we are in psychological trauma. Unless you accept to go through serious therapy, then you'll never know that you're in crisis. And then please, let's embrace healing. He says trauma kills slowly, especially because one cannot trace serious or noticeable symptoms. This again credits the importance of therapy from the word go. And then Baraka Maui says, I think people don't care nowadays. Someone can treat you badly and no time to say sorry. But those days in the 90s, there was a big gap between genders. I'm listening from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Thank you, Baraka. And then, one more comment from Fredbon says that just the way you check in hospital for healthy checkups, the same way we should normalize checking in therapy sessions time to time. This really helps to offload psychological baggage. Yeah, I think that comment will continue. I think there's some part missing there. So, Mora, I'm really learning a lot today. I'm just learning. I'm listening to you and I'm learning a lot, some things that I did not know. And I appreciate that. And I'm sure other people are learning as well. As we are wrapping up, almost wrapping up, rather, maybe you can respond to uh, Kevin. Kevin was talking about how true is that our brain doesn't develop further after the age of 25. According to your knowledge, is this really true? He says that mambo ya frontal cortex, that it does not develop further the age of 20, further from the age of 25. How, maybe can you respond to this?
What happens is the brain is not the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until the age of 25, and that's because the prefrontal cortex is the part where you are the part of the brain that makes decisions, the part of the brain that also just helps the emotional regulation alongside the amygdala. But you will notice that the decision when you're at about 25, 26, the decisions you are making at the age of 21, at the age of 18, at the age of 14, you look back and you're like, who was that? And why was I making those decisions? You
Yeah.
understand?
Yeah.
And that is what the phrase getting wiser, quote unquote, getting wiser with age means, because by then you're fully aware of consequences. Before 25, you have not fully grasped the idea of what of consequence of how decisions largely affect your life, and that's why we describe teenagers as reckless or making risky behaviors. And at 25, you're an adult. You've taken 5 years to be an adult, because at 19 you're still a teenager. I don't know what I know. We say the age of 18 you're an adult, but I still say you're a teenager. You're post teenagehood, and even at 20, you shouldn't
Yeah.
make life
That one is
altering
legally.
decisions
That
on
one
your
is just
own.
you are an adult legally, but you are not really an adult. It's just you have the legal whatever.
Exactly. So yes, it is at the age of 25 that your prefrontal contact uh, cortex rather sorry cortex your prefrontal cortex fully develops, and then you're more aware of your decisions and the implications of the decisions that you make. Yeah, because that's the part of the brain that actually does that. Yeah. I loved what was it Fred Bonkongo talked about
Yes.
healing is not a process, because healing means you go back to the pain. Pain is a very unpleasant thing, very unpleasant.
Mm.
And I'm glad, especially in African context. Um, when I think about the amount of abuse that was hidden in "oh, we love you" as a parent, you know, physical abuse, kutandikwa,
Yeah,
kuchapwa, that is
they say
abuse,
that
and I
ati si wewe na chapa ni tabia mbaya na chapa.
that was not true. The We had to grow up to be people pleasers. It affects how you grow up. You had to grow up to be someone who's very fearful, and you do not have a voice. You do not know what you like. Your sense of self-worth has been reduced so much because of the fear and anxiety around this particular parent. And you hear older people saying, "Oh, we turned out well. Oh, we are here." But are you how often do you converse with your parent, and it's not out of obligation but out of the love that you have for them? How many times do you go to see your parents? How many times do you go to shags? Do you understand?
Mm.
Because and it is not a matter of obligation. You're not doing it. You in fact just calling to check up. It's not to say acha nimekutumia hii pesa ya nini out of obligation. You don't want to be cast by your parents because you're not helping them, and it's obligation to help them. How many people do things for their community, for their parents out of love? And that's the question I ask. And you realize the answers are very, they get lost somewhere, and they're like, these things they happen, and all that. But in truth, you're bringing up a person who does not have a voice.
Okay.
And I like when we talk about the Gen Zs and some of the millennials and how they're responding to the current finance bill, and because we do. personally, I'm in support of rejecting it. We need to reject the bill because they have very oppressive clauses and all that. How our parents and how our uncles would respond to oppression is directly connected to how they were treated as children, because it is very oppressive for you to beat up a child, kumwita ng'ombe, kumwita we mjinga, hujui kitu yoyote unafanya, and how you cower from that, because that is a figure of authority. But now we have young people who are saying, you will hear us no matter what you say. And utasikia ni wazazi wanasema, hawa ni watu vichwa ngumu. Si vichwa ngumu, ni we have found our voices for ourselves.
Yeah.
And if we won't allow our parents to abuse us, we will not allow a government to abuse us. But if you allow a figure of authority and you cower around it, sembuse serikali, you become very fearful of oppressive authority, quote unquote, because authority shouldn't be oppressive in nature. You are there to serve the people, right? So even trauma is directly linked, because in your head you're like, you remember that one time you tried to say something for yourself and you were met with a very hot slap. No one listened to you and no one cared, and you gave up even before you knew what uh, the rule of thumbs is, or thirds, or whatever, before you would understand what is the history of Kenya. You gave up at the age of 5, you gave up at the age of 4 years on your voice. So that directly talks to how we respond to other stresses and other triggers in our current state, like being oppressed. Understand? So again, going back to healing and what Mr. Congo said on healing being difficult, healing is very difficult. It is not easy to go back to that. Kama, I would equate it to you having a wound on your arm. So you have to go back to that wound. You have to put some tunaitanga spirit, methylated, I think, spirit on it, and the sting. It's very painful as you heal it, but it's going to help to disinfect that part. You understand? And it's going to heal it, but you have to go back and look at it and take care of it. Otherwise, it's going to be much more infected. You might even have the whole arm amputated. So healing is a process. It's not easy, but it is necessary. It is very important, not just for ourselves, but for our generations, because we do understand that we can pass on trauma from one generation to another. Yes.
Thank you, Moraa, for that. I can see Fred Bon says that, Shira, do you know being beaten or even insulted by your parent is wrong? But we take it as something normal. The brain records this as abuse, but you never know it unless it starts building up. And then it says healing your inner self to commence your best life. To commence your best life, and then identifying toxic relationships. Both books are written by Benjamin Zulu. So please, any serious person with their lives needs to read this book. Okay. And then I can see Timothy Mabango says that great lessons today being taken to school, home, and across society. Above all, I'm understanding some psychology. Thank you, Tim, for being here. Then Fred Bond says that let us raise the next generation as a healthy generation and start from where we have found and known peace. Let's heal, please. I'm a living testimony that healing is painful, but it works. Joseph Wambua says that today I'm happy to join this enriching content. Trauma, in my opinion, is the emotional and psychological response to an event or series of events that are deeply distressing, or I'm here to learn. And then we can see Live, Laugh, and Love says healing is something so esoteric. There is pain requirement that brings the clarity of God that restores. Okay, Moraa, people are really resonating with healing, and people are now talking about. I can see people talking about even moving forward. The trauma after the trauma and the healing part, which you have really emphasized on, and as we as we almost wrap up the show, okay, I can see what Fredbot is saying. I cannot ignore this. He says that I should read all the comments, but the comment you skipped was connected to the others. I don't know which comment I've skipped. Let me check here. I don't know. I'll try to read all of them. I'm not sure whether I've skipped any lesson. I mean, any comment. Uh, Okay, there's this one. Psychologists say we are products of nature and nurture. It really means so. So, guys, it is time we do better because we know better. Let us be the last generation to go through psychological pain. Okay. There are comments coming in here. So, some of them I might maybe have skipped them because I've zinakuja hivi. So, si ati nimeruka kwa kutaka. Anyway, Mora, as we're wrapping up, you have talked about healing, and I'm very interested to hear, and also to hear how people are responding to that. Maybe as you wrap up, do this as you're giving us your final comments and ways to handle trauma and to heal through it. You can also maybe share it to us if there is any memorable experience or story from your work, because I know your work is one of the interesting things that you do, and it needs somebody with an extra energy to do that, especially with children. So share to us a memorable experience or a story from your work that highlights the importance of addressing trauma, as you wrap up also with healing and your final comments.
Okay. I'll start with highlighting a few things of why healing is very important. You will live in your own, world, and going through your trauma, and especially emotional trauma that stems from childhood, yeah. And your understanding of the world will be more profound when you get a partner, or when you're dating, or when you get into a relationship or a marriage, because those aspects of trauma will really come out. For example, if someone had, when you talked about financial trauma and poverty as a form of trauma, the way they handle the money within the relationship will really, um, even as an individual, let me, as poverty as in itself will be part of, even as an individual, uh, the way you either try to accumulate a lot of things, so that when you get a little money, you try to get as many things as possible, so that you don't know when it's going away because you didn't have it. So you hold on so much, you become a miser, or you hold on so much to things. Or if you're neglected as a child, you might decide to be socially dissociated, where you don't want to form meaningful relationships with people. So you find it very hard to form meaningful relationships in your life, be it friendships, be it with a partner or a spouse. So that really shows up in the way you relate with people. Um, in my work as a child safeguarding officer, and in my work as a child participation officer, I have found that the way children are treated, when we talk about acute and chronic trauma over time, and even complex trauma, I have seen that their behavior plays, a big part in displaying whether they've gone through a good childhood or they're going through a terrible childhood. At one time, uh, we okay. Let me give you a bit of background on this so that it makes sense. In Kenya, we have what you call the Kenya Children Assembly. The organization I work for is part of the team that facilitates these meetings, these elections. It's generally like an actual children's an assembly where we have parliamentarians in the legislature and all that, making laws and all that. But now for children, where children come together to talk about the issues and present maybe a memoranda to their counties or to their sub counties or to the country on what they feel about certain things. As a kid, I was part of it, so I am someone who's very passionate about child participation. Now, going back to that particular day where we had a child participation event, it was in, I'm not sure if I should say the county or it was a sub county Kenya Children Assembly event. So let me not mention it, but it was a sub county event, and we had children from all over this sub-county, because now the sub-county has wards and all that, you get it? So they all came together to, debate, deliberate, and have conversations on matters that affect them rather within that
Okay.
sub-county.
Mm-hmm.
Now, part of these children who are from the streets, in Kenya we call them street children, but I think
Mm-hmm.
should be children living in the streets or families living in the streets. Yeah. Now, it came time for meals, lunchtime, and then what would normally happen is children go first. It's always a principle that children go first before adults, and then of course they queue to get the food. What I noticed was the children who are coming from the streets bundled themselves all together in a corner during this time. While every other child was getting on the queue to get food, these children walijitenga kando, walijieka kando. And that really, I would say it broke me to a level, because even where they would sit at the very back when they came. And even when you tell them, please go sit at the front, they would refuse and say, si tuko sawa hapa. During lunchtime, even when you tell them, I had to really ask them, kabisa, kabisa, you can go eat. It's like you're part of this. You eating you are entitled to this food just like every other child in this forum. You understand? So, as part of my work, you get to see a display of such behavior. And it's not just with, say, children living in the streets alone, but also children who are very, very reserved. It's unlike children love to play and interact, and they do it in the most hilarious of ways. Unapenda kukula waru, pia mi napenda kukula waru, and that's as friendship stems from that. It's just so beautiful. So when you notice a child is very reserved and keeps to themselves and doesn't want to talk as much, I agree there are children who are introverted, but more often than not, these are it could be an indicator, especially when they don't want to play or talk to other children. It could be an indicator of trauma or abuse. Yeah, so that's part of the my first-hand interaction with what trauma can do, because I understand you not being dignified. When you talk about the children who are living in the streets during this forum, you who are not dignified, even getting access to the most basic of needs like food, even when you're in a space where you are not supposed to feel a certain feeling, it will still come automatically, subconsciously, you know. And I like what Fredbone said about healing, because these are things that maybe in your present life you don't think about it, but your brain will register it as trauma. Your brain will register it as pain. And unless you heal and unless you go through that form of therapy and get a sense of psychosocial support, then you will continue repeating the same patterns and habits. Say in a relationship, you'll always look for partners who harm you, because you will not, any other relationship for you will not make sense if you are. And then you ask yourself, why am I always choosing toxic partners? Because for you, the way you relate to a relationship is from a point of abuse.
Of
Yeah.
toxicity.
Healing
Okay.
is very, very important,
Thank you.
because
Thank you,
it affects the quality of life generally.
yeah.
And I'm sure we all want the highest form of quality when it
Quality
comes
of
to
life.
our lives. Yeah.
True.
Mm.
Yeah, this has been one of the most episodes that I've learned, and I'm just thinking, I'm just, in my head, I'm listening to you. I'm also trying to resonate with it, and also just review also my life in itself. And I think this is a good conversation, and a conversation that should be held even more. And allow me to appreciate everybody who has watched us live. I can see Adoro Mondi, Triple O is in the building saying the ranking member comment. Thank you very much. And let me read this because Fred Bonwell might take me to court. He says that, yes, the one before the books I mentioned, but anyhow, this is how much informed and timely, this is so much informed and timely, especially at a time we are celebrating Men's Mental Wellness Month. Please, men, let us open up. And then Live, Love, and Love says, Moraa, men are now traumatized by these 2000s. Anasema gasi imeisha na sina aki from this female gender. How can we go about it as men? We're tired. Okay, that is Live, Love, and Love. And then we have Baraka Maui saying, juzi tu baba amenikwaza nikaondoka nyumbani for 4 months. I'm healed, nimerudi previous weekend. My advice, let us run away from trauma environment. Okay. And then Live, Love, and Love tells Barakama, we make peace always with the elders. Going and coming, healing can only come if there's a proper dialogue and reunion.
Yeah.
And then Baraka Maui says, Live, love, and laugh. They can't say sorry. Okay, this is the, if we continue, this conversation will not end in time. Time is not on our side.
Yeah.
But Moraa,
I
is there
just
anything that
realized
you want to?
cannot be had in one sitting in 1 hour because it does
Yeah.
affect each and every one of us. Because Fred Bond says every one of us needs psychological healing, to be honest, especially coming from the African context. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
About what? Let me just say this. This will be my parting words when it comes to trauma. We need to have what you call trauma-informed care. So when one of the comments went like, we need to stay away from environments that causes trauma. That is true. You cannot heal in the same environment where you're experiencing trauma. That's very hard. So sometimes when you can, if you have the ability to, take yourself away from that traumatic situation. And also, trauma informed care leads to resilience building. So, resilience is your ability to bounce back from a very tough situation or a traumatic stressor or a traumatic event. So, once your resilience is built over time, because resilience is like a muscle that you build and it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And lastly, community empowerment. Please, please have a community around you that knows, hey, there's something up with this one. When they notice a behavior change, because ourselves we might not notice it, it might be too much in our heads. So having a community around you, having support around you, having people who care about you is very essential in your healing journey. Yes. So I'm very grateful to everyone who's joined, and I think that will be the parting shot. Thank you so much, Bashira.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everybody who has watched us live and everybody who will watch this late. And in a special manner, I'd like to thank Moraa very, very much for honoring the invitation, showing up and, giving us good vibes and learning. We are learning a lot from her. Personally, I am. I hope everybody else will attest to that. This is, let me say in other words, that this is time well wasted. Yeah. So I really appreciate that, Moraa, from you. And also, just to remind everybody who is watching us that if you haven't subscribed, if you haven't shared, please tell somebody to subscribe, tell yourself to subscribe and share and all that. And then we like to remind you as you're wrapping up that we have an event coming up on the 29th of this month at Game Fest at Ruaka. For those people who are in Kenya and for those people who are in around Nairobi, you can join us. All the details are on our website. So you can go to www.ashiraspeaks.com or those social media platforms that are running down there on your screen, and you'll be able to get more information on that. So I also like to make to give out this this is an announcement that it has been 50 episodes of African Corner so far, 50 episodes, and I'm honored that Moraa is in the 50th episode. And I'm saying this because African Corner will take a break. We'll take a short break, but we'll be back soon. But what I like to inform our people like Fred Bond and all the audiences that we're going to take a short break after 50 episodes, and we will be back, or I will be back soon with Moraa and the other people with so much information and knowledge that you'll be learning from African Corner. I can see David Washira, the last comment says that Good job, guys. Thank you, David Oshira, for watching us live. So, guys, with that, I'd like to call it a night. Appreciate everybody one more time. And I'd like to also say that my name is Mutagi Washira Wanyaga. Ici nĩ ngĩrona cia mũmbi mũmbũri. Thayo, thayo, thayo. Good night.